Are you ready to massively shift your life? I'm Chuck Whitman, and I build great traders that lead great lives. Traders I have trained have generated in excess of $1 billion in trading revenue and are found at some of the largest proprietary trading firms and hedge funds in the United States. Today's Attack with the Stack Part 2. In episode 1, we talked about the drift. We talked about the beginning usage of the stack. Everybody has thoughts, emotions, and actions, TEA, that come up. But these emotions that we experience, these emotions are meant to be expressed. When we repress emotions, they express themselves later through either anger and rage, which is outward expression, or through disease and illness, which is internal expression. To escape our emotions, people tend to suppress by using alcohol, drugs, social media, pornography, and even work. That's the one that people don't pay enough attention to. They just work all the time to suppress what they're feeling. Last week, we learned that we need to get our emotions out of our heads. We need to get these emotions out. Emotions are meant to be expressed. So we need to express these emotions. And we do this through putting these emotions into the stack. When we do this, this allows us to get our emotions out of our heads, and then we can begin to examine the root story that is causing the emotions in the first place. The drift is what we're describing. The drift are these emotions that are coming up for us. And when we suppress these emotions, we begin to lose control. And our suppression begins to drift us away from what we want in life. We must stop the drift before you damage your life. You must stop the drift before you damage relationships of people that you love very much. You must stop the drift before you make yourself sick, before you find yourself with cancer, or find yourself with obesity, or you can't sleep at night, or a whole variety of other things. The stack is the safe place for you to express these emotions. And once we fully express our emotions into the stack, then we can begin to separate ourselves from the story and examine our story without attachment. That was all we covered last week. This week, we're moving from the drift to the shift. And in the shift, we change our perspective of our stories and we begin to see new possibilities. There is no ability to shift, which is shifting your state, or lift, which is learning from our situations, if you don't first address the drift. So let's get into the shift. So to start off with, we're going to question the trigger from the drift. We're going to question the trigger of our story. So we're asking ourselves the question, what is the original story? And you're going to summarize this answer in 1 to 2 sentences. Last week, we were blasting it all out there. Full emotion, lots of swearing, being very, very raw. Some of you might be turned off by this, but I actually challenge you. If you get turned off by the profanity that I put last week in the stack, you have your own triggers. What is it about me swearing that's triggering you? I found for myself that I would often put myself in a place where when I tried to be safe, when I wouldn't say these things, I was actually holding back. Now, it's not to say that you're always going to be just cussing like a sailor. That's not always the case. But we've got to be raw. Don't hold anything back. So we did that last week. So now we're going back and we're looking at what is the original story, but we're summarizing it in 1 to 2 sentences. So last week we worked through a situation with Steve, who was the maintenance guy for the building. In the situation with Steve, where I'm renting an office and I'm having all kinds of issues where my office smells like shit. So I'm describing my upset with the building and specifically with Steve because it's not getting fixed. So I went into that great detail last week, but this time we're summarizing it. So what is the original story? Well, Steve doesn't give a shit about me and the issues in the office. That's the original story. So as we go through these questions, we're using Steve in the stinky situation as our example. All right, 1B, what evidence do you have to prove this story true? The answer, the story could be true because blank, where you write down the evidence stating that this story could be true. All stories you tell yourself are true, by the way. True to who? Well, to you, of course. Of course they're true to you. You wouldn't have a story if you didn't believe they were true. So yes, you're carrying a story that you believe to be true. You believe your emotions are righteous. You believe your emotions are accurately capturing the story or the situation. Okay, so in 1B, what evidence do you have to prove this story true? Well, again, we're back to the training wheels process. Here's why this version could be true with Steve in the stinky situation. The response to things can be slow. I've mentioned the smell issue for 2 months now, and it wasn't until I lost my shit last week that they sent anyone here to actually look at the office and the smell issue. There's my evidence. So yes, there's some things I'm looking for what is actually true in what I said. And yes, there's truth in this example. They were slow to respond. So also, there's some truth in the fact that Steve doesn't give a shit about me. Probably doesn't. He doesn't care. He probably thinks I'm a pain in the ass. So he does not give a shit about me. All right. Now we move to questions 2A and 2B. Question 2A, what is the me version of the story? The answer is the me version of this story is, and this is where the shift really begins. Because what we're doing is we're shifting our perspective and we're looking at the story from a different angle. So in this case, I'm moving the focus from outward, I'm pissed at Steve, to inward, focusing on me. And then 2B, what evidence do you have to prove that this story is true? And the answer is, here's why this version could be true. And I list the reasons why the version of looking inward at me could be true. So these answers are shifting my perspective. So question 2A, what is the me version of the story? Well, with the example of Steve in the stinky situation, the answer is we're shifting it, right? It's no longer about Steve, it's about Chuck. So you see, Chuck does not give a shit about Steve and the issues that Steve is facing with the office. Now look at that. It's no longer about Steve, it's about Chuck. So we've shifted it. All right. Then 2B, what evidence do you have to prove this true? Answer, well, if I look at my feelings about it, I really don't give a shit about Steve. Truly. I also don't give a shit about any issues that he's facing with the office. Those are like his problems. They're not mine. I don't care about Steve and I don't care about the office. Well, that's true. All right. Now we move to 3A, what is the opposite version? So the answer is the opposite version of the story is blank, and I'm turning the original story around. So I'm moving the focus from outward to inward. And what evidence do you have to prove this true? Answer is, here's why this version could be true, and I'm listing the reasons why. All right. So in 3A, what is the opposite version with Steve in the stinky situation? Steve does give a shit. Steve does give a shit about me and the issues with the office, and he's doing what he can do to solve the problem. See how this has shifted? Originally, Steve didn't give a shit about me and he didn't care about the office. So now I'm doing the opposite version is, well, no, Steve does care about me and Steve does care about the office. So now my focus has shifted to what Steve is actually doing to help me. All right, now we move to 3B. What evidence do we have to prove this true with Steve in the stinky situation? Well, Steve did send his plumbing team last week out to work on the things the day that I sent the email to him. They got the smell fixed, and at least the shit smell coming from the gym below me was because the plumbing was broke. Okay, so in this example, Steve did send the plumbing team out, and they did work on getting it fixed. So see, there's evidence that Steve is actually trying to help me. He's trying to help my situation. And I want you to notice when we flip it, now I'm actually looking and seeing that, yeah, Steve is actually trying to help me. My original story that Steve doesn't give a shit and Steve doesn't care about the office, it's losing its charge. My original story is losing its charge. All right, now we go to 4A and 4B. So now we've looked at it from two different opposing views. One, where we went from Steve to me, what Steve thought of me, and two, where we looked at Steve and said, well, maybe he is trying to help. Right now we're going to focus to, well, what is our desired version? One of the key questions I'm always asking students again and again and again is simply, what do you want? And what's really fascinating is that so much of the time you would think that would be a no-brainer, that people would know what they want. People really don't know what they want. And what's ironic is they're really, really upset about something, but they don't even know what they want. It's just totally irrational. So what is the desired version? Well, the desired version is blank, and then we create the story that we want. And in 4B, what evidence do we have to prove that this is true? And so here is the version of why this could be true. We list all the reasons why getting what I want, the desired version, could be true. So now notice there's a major shift here. Now we've stopped focusing on the problem and we're focusing on what we want. One of the things I always talk about, humans are focusing creatures. They're always focusing on something. So you can focus on what you want or you can focus on what you don't want, right? So at this point where we've shifted from the problem to getting what we want, anything is now possible. So if anything is possible, why not ask for what you want? All right. So what is it? desired version with Steve in this stinky situation? Well, Chuck and Steve can fix this problem in time for this week's event. I have an event this week. I need it fixed. So what's my desired version? That we work together and we get it fixed. Awesome. All right. So now 4B, what is the evidence to prove that this is true with Steve in the stinky situation? Well, there's what Steve can do and there's what I can do. If I sit around like a little bitch and complain about everything, nothing is going to change. If I want change, I can make sure that Steve understands my needs, but at the same time, I can take things into my own hands and I could order an air purifying machine. I could get an essential oil diffuser for the office. And regardless of what Steve decides, I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim to Steve. I'm not a victim to the smell. I'm not a victim to the office. So notice in my story, and this is going to be the case with you, in the story that you're telling yourself, you always make yourself a victim. I make myself a victim. So in this whole story with Steve, I'm the victim. Well, now when I focus on what I want, I'm no longer a victim. I'm actually taking ownership of the situation, responsibility of the situation. And now everything is shifted because I'm not just dependent on Steve. Now I'm like, I'm going to support Steve. I'm going to hope that Steve comes through, but regardless of what Steve does, I'm going to solve it for myself. This has put me in a place of power, a very strong position. All right. So now we move into 5. Question 5A and 5B. And 5A, after doing this work, which version of the story are you choosing and why? So we've got 4 stories out there right now. We got the original story. We've got the story where we flipped it and focused on me instead of Steve. We've got the story in which we flipped it again and looked at Steve trying to do the right thing rather than saying that he didn't give a shit. And now we're putting in the 4th story was, what do we actually want? 4 stories. Of the 4 stories, which is the one that we're going to choose? So the answer is I'm choosing blank version of the story because, and then I give the reasons why. So in 5B, then what are you committed to doing about it in the next 48 hours? So the answer is I'm committed to doing blank, blank, and blank in the next 48 hours to take action on my story. All right. So after doing this work, which version of the story are you choosing and why? So is Steve in this stinky situation? Chuck and Steve can fix this problem in time for Chuck's event this week. Why do I choose this one? Because it's the only one of the 4 stories that actually gets shit done. There's no reason at all to even entertain talking about the other 3 stories. This version will get it done. Every other version, the other 3 versions, all make me a victim. Everything else will put me back to waiting, hoping, pleading that something is going to get done. This solution allows me to stay on Steve and to get shit done, which empowers me to find a path to my own answers. It allows me to get shit done on my terms and in my way. Big, big, big shift. Then we get in 5B. What am I committed to doing about it in the next 48 hours? Well, I'm committed to ordering the air purifier today. I'm committed to getting the oil diffusers here in the office tomorrow. I'm committed to staying on Steve to fix the issue. And I'm committed to fixing what I can actually fix in the next 48 hours. I can bitch about it or I can just fix it myself, right? So I have a list of 4 things: air purifier, essential oil diffuser, staying in contact with Steve, and fixing things myself. So look at what we've done here, right? In part 1, we acknowledged and got honest that we had these emotions and then we expressed them. We got them out of the body where then we could begin to look at them. In 2, we're examining these emotions so we can shift them. So in summary, we're using the stack to help us express emotions that we feel. Expressing these emotions allows us then to examine the feelings. Once we examine our emotions, we can then shift those emotions into a story that supports what we want. This process allows us to take a potentially destructive story and turn it into an asset to get what we want. In addition, the stack moves us from being a victim or a responder to situations to being empowered or a creator of situations. You can see the progression that's happening through this. I want to go back to just for a second to point 4, where this process allows us to take a potentially destructive story. Now, I want you to think about, you could probably, if you pause, you could think of a story that either involves yourself or somebody you knew or even something you saw on TV or something like that, where somebody got completely irrational. They had a story. They had these emotions that needed to be expressed and they came flying out in rage. They felt that story was true. They started to express their emotions. They started to express their rage and they lost control because they'd been suppressing so many other things. And then they beat the shit out of the maintenance man, or they get the shit beat out of them by the maintenance man, or something of this nature comes. And now all of a sudden they're being charged with assault. They're being sued civilly. They have a relationship that can never, ever be repaired. And this becomes a black mark, a black eye on their story as they go through their life. It never has to be that way. This process is so powerful because it takes something that could go really, really bad and flips it into an asset where now I'm not upset with Steve. I'm doing what I can do to solve the problem, determined that I'm going to get it solved. And then when I'm not upset with Steve, guess what Steve wants to do? Steve's going to want to help me more. Just think about with yourself. If someone is just being a jackass to you, how do you feel? You're like, well, fuck that guy. I don't want to help him. But if they're nice to you, well, then you're like, oh, I want to see this guy. I don't want his office smell like crap. And you start to see people do things for you in a way they didn't before. But regardless whether Steve ever does anything, we have assumed control. We've empowered ourselves to get what we want. So we took something that could have been really bad and potentially made it into something that was really good. That is the power of the stack. And guess what? We're just getting started. This is only part 2. Next week, we'll move into part 3 and we'll talk about the lift. By the way, we had this last week. It's here for you. You can click on this link and you can do your own stack. You can work through the process. And if you complete the questions that are in the stack, you're going to get free access to our How Little Money Trades webinar, which is an amazing free bonus for you. It's our gift to you for doing the fucking work. That's what you're doing when you do the stack. So I give this gift to you, and then there'll be more of that. But what day is it? Yeah, it's Tuesday. It's Trader Tip Tuesday. And on Trader Tip Tuesday, I come to you with points like today, strategies like today with the stack that help you take your performance and your life to an elite level. I'll see you next Tuesday.